Our story begins with Tsubasa Shiki, our protagonist, moving to Hokkaido. Seeing he's in Kitami already, he drops off, but it's incredibly cold. Though then he sees a gyro barely protected against the cold. She notices him, so Tsubasa nervously asks how to reach his place, but he's told he's 3 hours away as he dropped off too early because Kitami's gigantic, to his shock, and that taxis don't come here. So she invites him to wait for the bus, and he relievedly accepts, explaining he's from Tokyo and moved due to family reasons, surprising her because she reckons Hokkaido's lame in comparison. But he says Hokkaido's relaxing, to her shock as he thinks on how he was for being lame in Tokyo, but is relieved no one knows how lame he is here. But then she gets surprised hearing he's 16, like her, and that they're in the same school, so she holds his arm to his shock because it's cold, but he can feel her. He gets lost in thought, so the gyro puts snow in his as a prank, but seeing her now, he accidentally says, "so pretty," out loud. So she hits him, but she's left blushing. The bus then arrives and she's gotta leave, but Tsubasa asks her name, and she reveals it's Minami Fuyuki as the bus departs. He's left happy, but notices he forgot to take the bus to his dismay. The next day, he's introduced to his new class, though he's disappointed Fuyuki isn't there, but shrugs it off, saying he likes dark-haired serious girls anyway. Only for Fuyuki to come in, to both surprise. Afterwards, she learned his name, so she chooses to call him by his first name, to his shock. Though then he's freezing, seeing he didn't wear enough clothes, but Fuyuki at this hands him a blanket, which he loves, thinking it feels like Fuyuki's warm embrace, but gets nervous, picturing her blanket as her. After class, he returns it, but she smells it, saying it smells like them smooshed together, making him nervous. But then she wants a favor in return, to walk her home, and he complies, so they head to the station as she takes a train home. But she then asks if he has a girlfriend, to his shock, which he denies, as he thinks on how he's never dated anyone, and talk about places they go on dates, as he mentions fake ones from Tokyo, while she says they just visit each other home here since winter's too cold. They then arrive, so Tsubasa's leaving, but Fuyuki stops him and asks if he'd like to come over tomorrow, to his shock, but she says she wants to talk more about Tokyo. So he ends up accepting, and she leaves. And the next day, he arrives there finding Fuyuki, claiming he's lucky, because her parents aren't home, shocking him, but figures it's just so they can use the living room, as she explains it has a big heater compared to her rooms, to his relief, only to be touched by her foot as she laughs and teasingly asks what will they do now. But Chihiro's get him a drink, but she spills it on her to his shock. So Chihiro's change and comes back in some random skimpy pajamas she found, as it's hot inside, to his utter shock. She then puts on a movie, though later it shows a scene, making Tsubasa nervous, but he then hears Fuyuki and is touched by her foot, but she's just asleep. Later, she wakes up as Tsubasa explains he wanted to let her rest, but he has to go now, so he leaves. But outside, she rushes at him and apologizes, but he's only concerned if she'll catch a cold and covers her with his scarf. Seeing this, she decides to invite him good as an apology, so they head together to a mall, where she has him try their chicken, which she loves. And then he has a rice ball, but notices rice is on his cheek, so she grabs and eats it, wildly embarrassing him. At school, Fuyuki spots Tsubasa and wipers in his ear, surprising him, but notices he was staring at the Winter Festival ad, which he wants to check out, so she decides to go with him since he's insisting, leaving him nervous, wondering if it's a date. The next day, he awaits for her incredibly nervous, and even more as she arrives, seeing her casual clothes. They then talk about how she hasn't been to the festival since she was young, as he claims he's excited, but she's wary. So they head there, and Tsubasa's amazed by it, which makes her excited. After exploring a bit, Tsubasa goes by a corn dog and goes back to Fuyuki, but she wants him to feed her the corn dog, which he does, but he found it dirty and now gets nervous, thinking biting into it is an indirect kiss, but tries not think on that and bites it. But Fuyuki grins at it, saying he's easy to read, to his embarrassment. Afterwards, they had fun at the festival, and while sharing a drink, he thanks her for coming with him, making her blush, though she mentioned she was worried, not knowing if she'd still have fun here like when younger, and fearing he'd be disappointed. But she stands it up, saying that now, when she's with him, he makes her like Hokkaido even more, being glad he's here, which makes him blush. But then she slips, so Tsubasa rushes and holds her, ending up close together, which embarrasses them both, and later, they head back. But Tsubasa asks Fuyuki if she'd like to hang out again, which makes her blush and tease him, but she tells him she'd like to go to another festival again. The next day at school, Fuyuki has Tsubasa eat with her, and since he loved Hokkaido's food at the festival, she invites him yakiben, feeding him herself, but he loves the taste. But Fuyuki claims she's now gotten back at him for the corn dog, making him blush. She then sees his bento, but finds it fancy, so she takes pics while he invites her some, finding it amazing as he says his grandma made it. Afterwards, he thanks her because he's never eaten yakimen before, saying everything's a new experience with her. But this makes her think this means he's a spoiled rich kid, but explaining he's not, she has doubts. So she wants to accompany him home, which she later does, but Tsubasa's nervous due to his grandma. But on the way, Fuyuki spots a snow fort and gets in it, and forces Tsubasa in as well, but they mention it's tight and warm inside. But someone outside hears them, so he exits and sees it's his grandma, to his shock, and gets worse when Fuyuki hugs him, saying he was too quick pulling out, to their disbelief. Though she finds out it's his grandma, Kid Hanamiya, so she excitedly introduces herself, saying her cooking was delicious. But as she asks what's their relationship, Fuyuki's about to say friends, only for Tsubasa to say classmates. Though then, Kade says she's got to go with Tsubasa and leaves, opening an umbrella. So Tsubasa says goodbye as he thinks how Kid hates when people act open in relationships, thinking he won't be able to talk to Fuyuki again. But Fuyuki stops them, warning Kid not to use an umbrella, explaining her grandma got injured while slipping and her hands weren't free to stop herself, and that she'll show a safer way to reach their home since the road's slipper, and carries her bag. Though Tsubasa then carries it but notices Fuyuki's mad because he called her a classmate. But Tsubasa says he was nervous and explains that he thinks of her as a very important friend, making her blush and smile, but she teases with him. Afterwards, they arrive to his home, which is gigantic, astonishing Fuyuki. But as she says she'll go home, Kade decides to invite her tea, which she happily accepts. Though later, Kade figures she must be getting soft, but that she's sure Fuyuki's a lovely girl, only to see her excitedly taking pictures of everything. But seeing Tsubasa smile, she recalls not seeing him like this in a long time and chooses to trust him. The students go take ski lessons while Fuyuki teases Tsubasa with it, but then she tries talking to the girl sitting next to him, Sayuri Akino, but she's ignored. She explains to Tsubasa she's desperate to be friend with Akino, since she's a Gyaru, she's always cold. But noticing she has features he likes, he stares at her and blushes. But Fuyuki notices this, so she returns to her seat. Later, they've arrived, but since Tsubasa's got no experience, his teacher sends him practice with Akino, who doesn't know as well. He tries talking to her to help Fuyuki, but she ignores him, putting on earbuds. She then walks with her snowblades, so Tsubasa also tries, but she slips and is angered. Though then, Fuyuki arrives, skating like a pro to Tsubasa's amazement. But as she's called over, Akino talks and asks if Tsubasa if he's dating Fuyuki. Shocked, he claims they're just friends, but then Akino, pissed, points out Fuyuki's perfect, being an extrovert Gyaru, saying she has everything she doesn't. Later, they go eat lunch but by themselves because their teacher forgot about them until after everyone ate. Not wanting to bother Akino, Tsubasa goes eat somewhere else, but he's left his chopsticks in the bus. So he heads back, but there he sees Akino wiping her body. To their shock, he apologizes and tries to leave, but Akino stops him, wanting to explain. While eating, she explains that she sweats a lot and embarrassed of it. She sat out of sports but eventually fell behind her classmates, lost confidence, and before she knew it, she was avoiding everyone. But knowing it's getting real bad, she tries putting effort, like with skiing. And she's telling him this because he didn't know anything about her since he's new, so it's easier to talk to him, and that he's uptight and won't spread the rumor. Though that her backpack beeps and she stares embarrassedly at it. But Tsubasa encourages her, so she takes out her game console and plays a game with it. But seeing Tsubasa doesn't know this game, she has him try and has fun explaining him the mechanics. But she's pressing herself against Tsubasa, making him nervous. But seeing his face, she stops and figures he got bored of her explanation. She explains she wants to get along with people and puts tons of thoughts into her looks for it, but that she actually loves games. And when people get scared of her, she hides in them, calling herself pathetic. But Tsubasa claims she isn't, and that it's great she's trying hard, complimenting her personality and looks, and that it's awesome she's great at games, wanting her to teach him. She wildly blushes at this, but accepts teaching him play and then seeing him. But then they have to head back to ski. There, Akino's nervous, but Tsubasa tells her to try with skiing with him, like it's the game. So they go uphill, but Fuyuki notices them together. Meanwhile, Akino asks Tsubasa why does he want to ski, so he reveals that thanks to Fuyuki, he's challenging himself to try new things here, recalling all she's done with him. At this, she figures Fuyuki's alright, saying that Fuyuki sometimes talks to her, but she'd wonder why, as she's a loner, so she didn't know how to respond. They then reach the top, and there Tsubasa asks Akino for a favor. If he makes it down without falling, for her to respond to Fuyuki, saying that Fuyuki truly wants to be her friend. Akino admires his bravery, but claims this is just for Fuyuki, as he'd also like to be better friends with Akino, which makes her blush, and she accepts, so they descend down the hill, and Tsubasa reaches the end without falling. But Akino doesn't know how to stop, but Fuyuki, seeing this, skis to her, and teaches her how to safely fall, making her stop. But seeing their teachers now mad, Tsubasa goes apologize for them both, while Akino thanks Fuyuki and apologizes for being cold until now, making her happy. Though later, while heading back, Fuyuki appears odd, because Akino and Tsubasa fell asleep resting on each other. The day after skiing, Tsubasa's body's sore and he has to go to school, but there's a blizzard. But Kid says true Hokkaido citizens endure them, so he decides to go, but it's too much for him. And then a car comes his way, so he falls back and figures he's seeing Fuyuki flash before his eyes. But she's actually there, reproaching him for walking in a blizzard and has him hop in her car. There he meets her mom, Mai, another Gyaru, to his shock. She asks if Tsubasa has a girlfriend, so surprised, he claims he doesn't, so she teases him with Fuyuki. But this angers her, so she apologizes. After that, they talk about the blizzard, as Tsubasa thought the locals could bear it, but they say that's impossible, leaving him wondering what Kid meant. But then, as they talk about buying clothes, Tsubasa accidentally says, "You're both beautiful enough," out loud, making them both blush, so they then joke about that. And later, she drops them off. off, but Mia tells Fuyuki she made a nice play back there, which she embarrassedly agrees with. Inside, they see Akino, so Fuyuki goes hug her. But she's sore as well and talks to Tsubasa about it. But Fuyuki sees this and stops them, complaining not to act friendly without her. Later, during class, Fuyuki notices Tsubasa's dressed better for the cold, but shows him her warmers under her shirt and lends him some. Though then Akino arrives with her console, attracting Tsubasa to play with her. And Tsubasa asks Fuyuki if she wants to join in, so she asks and Akino lets her. So after school, they head to a mall where Fuyuki's teach the game, and she wins to the girl's happiness. Later, Tsubasa goes to the bathroom, so Fuyuki tells Akino to go buy cosmetics afterwards and calls her Seirin to her surprise. She accepts but tells Fuyuki that she's a nice Garu, which makes her blush. Tsubasa then comes back, so they go buy cosmetics together and before heading home, take pictures together. Later, back home, Tsubasa studies, but wondering if English homework's due, he texts Fuyuki while looking at their picture in the back of his phone, and she responds that she's in the shower, and Tsubasa turns red because she sent a picture of her legs. Fuyuki expects him to freak out, only for him to just apologize for bothering her. So disappointed, she sends him a selfie with her utterly shocking him, but he only compliments her beauty routine to her disappointment. So she decides to call them to his shock, so he decides to answer, but sees it's a video call, freaking out that his camera's not turned on. He blocks the phone's view, and they then talk about bathing, but then he mentions he's doing homework, since tomorrow they have to present it. But Fuyuki freaks out because she hasn't even started it and stands up. But her phone falls while Tsubasa's falls as well, having rushed to catch it. But her camera captures her entire body. They catch their phones, but Fuyuki asks if he saw, but Tsubasa confused because he didn't catch anything. She claims to have to go, so she hangs up and is left embarrassed. And the next day, she didn't present her homework in time. At karaoke, Tsubasa with his classmates hear Fuyuki sing a song she loves. Afterwards, they go eat, but Fuyuki points out it's almost Valentine's Day. Talking about chocolates, Tsubasa wonders to himself Fuyuki will give one to someone, but finds out she mixed chocolate for everyone. But he asks himself why is he relieved. Meanwhile, Akino looks at him. But when she's asked if she likes making chocolates, she claims she'd rather save the money for her hobbies. Later, they all leave, except Akino and Fuyuki, who say Tsubasa's name at the same time as Fuyuki asks if they had fun, which they did. But Akino now claims she didn't mean to say anything. They then head back. But Akino looks at a website about conquering a guy's heart with chocolate, though hides it afterwards. The next day, while playing games, Akino tells herself to forget about chocolate and to focus on her game. Only to later go to a mall to buy chocolate. But Fuyuki runs into her, who came to buy chocolate ingredients. But Akino nervously claims she just came for cosmetics and asks for her help. After buying some though, Fuyuki asks her what chocolate she likes, so she nervously says garnish. Fuyuki now leaves to buy her ingredients, but Akino stops her, asking to shop with her, but excusing it with wanting to make her a chocolate, so she happily agrees. Later, they head home. What Akino stops Fuyuki, asking if she doesn't want to give Tsubasa special chocolates, as they both blush at this. But Akino explains it's since they get along so well, but Fuyuki says of course since they're friends, saying he also gets well with Akino as well, but she claims they just play games together. Though then, she apologizes and they leave, but Fuyuki wonders what's the truth. Days later, it's February 13th and Tsubasa studies, nervously trying not to think on tomorrow. Meanwhile, Akino makes chocolate while Fuyuki teaches her how through phone. After finishing, we see Fuyuki's made tons of sweets, but she asks Akino who was she thinking on and making hers. So nervous, she reminds Fuyuki they're for her, making her happy. But Fuyuki asks if she's also giving it to someone else, and that for a while she's been wondering about if her and Tsubasa. But distracted, she accidentally bumps on a milk cardboard, which makes soy sauce and condiments fall on her sweets, ruining them. But she tells Akino she's fine and abruptly hangs to clean up, telling good luck to Akino through text. The next day, it's Valentine's Day, and at school he finds Fuyuki, but notices she looks odd as she hands him a prepackaged chocolate, which he really appreciates. Akino then arrives and is given one as well. Though then, she gives one to her friend Takeyumi Matsuo, but he claims it's a total letdown as it's not homemade. But as he's called outside, Akino approaches him and warns him that if he talks to Fuyuki like that again, he'll beat his crap, leaving him shocked. Later, after class, Fuyuki and Tsubasa are on cleaning duty at the music room as he thanks her for the chocolate, but he sees she's crying as Akino notices this and hides herself. Fuyuki explains what happened and feels she disappointed everyone in Tsubasa. But at this, Tsubasa opens up a piano, thinking this is all he can do for her right now, and begins playing the song she sang at the karaoke. She's left amazed as he explains he wanted to cheer her up, leaving Fuyuki extremely happy. Akino then arrives since she's got chocolates to give away to Tsubasa's shop, but Fuyuki figures her intentions and tries to leave. But Akino actually meant for her to their shop, reminding her she promised her, and Fuyuki hugs her. Tsubasa's left embarrassed, but Akino also has one for him as she compliments his piano skills, making him blush, and later they all eat their chocolates together. Final exams are coming soon and Fuyuki's nervous, but seeing Tsubasa liking thinking having his effort turn into good grades, she gets motivated and asks him to have a study party at her place. So later, they head there with Akino. They arrive and find out her family's out, so she goes get drinks and tells them head to her room. But on the way, Akino talks about not knowing where it is as they've never been here before. But Tsubasa reveals he has, to her shock, but that they only stayed downstairs. But Akino calls him a sneaky pervert at this, to his shock. They then enter her room and see it's very like Fuyuki. Fuyuki then arrives and they begin studying, starting with quizzing each other. But Fuyuki's nervous because she doesn't know any answer and only says that Katami produced 70% of the world's mint once as a random fact, though point out it's not a real answer. They then spent the next hours studying and are left exhausted. But Tsubasa notices it's past his curfew already, so he hurriedly rushes out. But he ends up falling on Miya's who is outside. But later, she drives him home, having explained what happened. But on the way, Miya talks about how Fuyuki got pressed during Valentine's Day. But she came back home extremely happy and wouldn't stop talking about how good Tsubasa's at piano. So she thanks him for that. She then drops him home but gives him a soda as a treat from Mama, which embarrasses him as she leaves. But Keed is there, furious. The next day, he heads to school but having to throw out garbage first as he remembers Keed toughly reproaching him. But then he sees a pink-haired Jaru and is left amazed by her beauty. But she then scares some crows and notices Tsubasa, telling him he's good to throw his trash now and abscond, leaving him confused. Later at school, he tells of this to Fuyuki, and she figures it's Rina, a major she adores, who's won their beauty contest 2 years in a row. Though then, she asks if he wants to have another study party, but he says he's got to study alone now, needing to concentrate, not wanting to tell her how mad Ki got as she blamed herself. So she figures she'll invite Akino. She rejects as well, saying they didn't study after Tsubasa left. Later, Fuyuki eats with Akino, noticing Tsubasa left, who's in the library studying, but he hears snores and notices Rina there asleep, and is left amazed by her beauty again. Though she wakes up while about to his shock, wondering why she was dreaming with that. But Rina sees him, so he turns his head away. But she approaches him and nervously explains she's on the library committee, so it's fine for her to sleep here. But Tsubasa says it's fine, but then she notices his perfect posture and touches his back, making him nervous. So then she sees his math answers and points out one's wrong. She then leaves, but Tsubasa's dumbfounded because she figured out a math answer with just a glance. Later, he returns home, but finds Ki, who wants to develop his mental fortitude, the tea ceremony to eliminate his carnal desires. But someone rings the doorbell, so Tsubasa goes and sees Rina, who's bringing the neighborhood bullet, finding out their neighbors. But she sees he's wearing Japanese clothes, and astonished by them, she leans towards him to his shock. Meanwhile, Cade goes find him as he's late, but sees him, with Rina leaning on him. To her shock, Cade's pissed, but Rina explains she slipped, but Tsubasa saved her, which Cade buys as she leaves. Cade recalls never seeing her before, since the house's head is the one who usually brings the bullet, and calls her a lovely girl, which surprises Tsubasa. But seeing Tsubasa's left staring outside, she decides tea won't be enough, and tells him that he has to reach the top 10 in his next exams. Otherwise, she'll send him straight back to Tokyo. Tsubasa heads to school worried but determined to pass, but he runs into Rina, who wanted to talk with him. But noticing he's gloomy, she asks if she got him in trouble yesterday, but he claims she hasn't, and that he just has to study. She explains she just loves all things historical and got overwhelmed by seeing Japanese clothes, realizing that's why she dreamed of. As an apology, she offers to tutor him, saying she's always been #1 at school, to Tsubasa's surprise, realizing that's how she knew a math answer that quickly. So he accepts her help, determined to still live in Hokkaido. She tells him to meet her for the next 3 days at the library storage room after class, as only she has access to it. But he's left thinking how they'll be all alone there, making him blush. They then arrive at school, but Fuyuki spots them talking together. After Rina leaves, she approaches Tsubasa shocked because he's friends with Rina, as he explains she's his neighbor. Though then, her feels weird, but claims it's nothing, and later, after class, Tsubasa meets up with Rina, though he's nervous seeing her, but forces himself to calm down and begins studying. She though points out his test results are already fine, but he claims to want to improve, so she teaches him his mistakes and gives him tips of future exam questions. And later, school's closing, so they head out and Tsubasa thanks her, but she asks why is he studying so hard, so he reveals that if he doesn't, he won't see some dear friends again. But Rina then tells him she'd like a reward now, asking him if he reaches top 10 to go on a date with her, to his shock. At night, Fuyuki watches TV instead of studying, though then she asks Miya if she ever gets a heavy feeling or that makes it hard to breathe. Meanwhile, Tsubasa studies with Rina through the phone as he thanks her again, and she claims she's looking forward her reward to his embarrassment. Though then she heads to sleep. Cade then hands him food and talk about the tests as he says he'll do his best. And the next day, the tests began. Though after their first ones, Fuyuki claims it was a disaster. But going to the library, she spots Tsubasa, so she goes after him, but can't seem to find him now. The next day, Fuyuki talks to Tsubasa, saying she didn't find him at the library yesterday, but figures it was someone else. Though he's left bothered as he didn't mean for this to be a secret, but remembers to get top 10 to end this. And 1 week later, the test results are out, though Fuyuki's depressed, having ranked 148 out of 176, having only remembered the questions they studied with Tsubasa, while Akino ranks 72. Meanwhile, Tsubasa meets with Rina and reveals he got ranked 3rd in the entire school and that her help in math and night studies helped him massively. But he's worried if he affected her studying, but she reveals she ranked 1 like always. But then she reminds him of his promise. Days later, Mia goes shopping while Fuyuki sleeps, and meanwhile, Tsubasa heads out dressed in Japanese-style clothes to Keed's confusion. And outside, he finds Rina wearing a yukata and is overwhelmed by her pookiness as she claims that she's always dreamt of going on a date in Japanese dress. Though later, while walking, Mia spots them. Afterwards, Tsubasa realizes he didn't think of a place to go, so he apologizes, but Rina tells him not to worry, saying that as long as she's with him, she's happy going anywhere, making him blush. But meanwhile, Mia messages Fuyuki that she was Tsubasa on a date with someone else, to her shock. In a mall, Fuyuki's called Akino over, showing Tsubasa's there with Rina to her shock, though Fuyuki explains she was at first shocked by her mom's texts, but got giddy after finding out it was Rina. But Akino wonders why was she called over, so Fuyuki says she figured she'd be interested, which Akino figures she is and decides to play along, following them. They go to an arcade where Rina's interested in plushies in a crane game, so Tsubasa tries to win one, but fails repeatedly. But Akino, seeing this, gets mad at his lack of ability and wants to go teach them, but Fuyuki tries to stop her. But then Tsubasa wins one for her, which Rina adores. At this, Fuyuki recalls how Tsubasa always tries his best for anyone despite anything, wishing she could be like that too, as she blushes and touches her. But she realizes what she just said and tries to nervously excuse it. But Akino was busy playing the crane game instead. Though they hear Rina and Tsubasa are leaving to the theater, so Fuyuki wants to follow them. But Akino goes get bags for her plushies first. But she took too long and they left, though consoles Fuyuki by giving her half her plushies. They then went to the theater, but didn't find them, so they decided to go see a movie by themselves. Meanwhile, Tsubasa and Rina are watching a movie about a woman who struggles, wanting to prove herself to others. But Tsubasa then notices Rina's crying. Afterwards, they go to a cafe and talk about this, as Rina explains she identified with the protagonist because she studies hard as well, but rarely gets much praise. Tsubasa recalls he went through the same thing before, which made him fight with his parents and led him to escape to Hokkaido. And Rina explains that she's always been self-conscious of how they see her and felt that if she didn't keep getting better, she wouldn't be appreciated, but sometimes wonders that if nobody appreciated her, if she'd even matter. But Tsubasa tells her that he bets lots of people see her and become inspired to do their best as well, surprising Rina that people see her. And she points out they have things in common and that he understands her, being very happy they met. As Tsubasa says he'd like to know even more about her. But at this, Rina asks if he has a girlfriend, to his shock. Meanwhile, Fuyuki and Akino leave the theater, but Fuyuki then spots Rina and Tsubasa. And meanwhile, Tsubasa tells Rina he's single. So Rina asks if he ever gets lonely since he's new in Hokkaido, but he explains he's made very special friends here, so he's not lonely at all, and that he now has her as well. Rina gets relieved as Tsubasa says they'd all hang out together, but Fuyuki suddenly reveals herself, saying she's in, but Akino says she blew their cover as Tsubasa realizes they were listening, though Fuyuki reproaches him for going on a date with Rina without telling her. But Rina asks who they are, so Tsubasa introduces them, and Fuyuki introduces herself as well, revealing she's her fan and asks to shake her hand, which she does, making Fuyuki excited. But Rina laughs, seeing why they're both very special to Tsubasa, making them blush. But then Mia, who is shopping, spots them and decides to invite them yakinuki. So they go to a restaurant and enjoy the meats, though afterwards they talk about how Rita's a genius, as Akino figures she won the gene lottery. But Fuyuki corrects her, saying that Rina works super hard for her looks and grades and that she inspires her to do better as well, which makes Rina very happy. Later, they leave the restaurant, but Fuyuki asks Tsubasa if he's going out with Rina. He denies it, explaining this date had reasons. But at this, Fuyuki tells him to make it even, his next date will be with her on spring break, as she later joins the girls and Tsubasa follows them. At school, Fuyuki reminds Akino tomorrow's white day as Tsubasa arrives and talks with him about it, as he reveals he'll participate, though Matsu is listening to them. Later, he approaches Tsubasa and tells him he wants to apologize to Fuyuki and Akino for what happened in Valentine's Day tomorrow, wanting his advice on what to say. But Tsubasa says he doubts Fuyuki's still mad and that Akino will accept his apology to her, leaving Matsu grateful and leaves afterwards. Later, Kid helps Tsubasa make sweets for tomorrow, and the next day Matsu apologizes to Fuyuki, gifting her an onion pie. She loves it, but tells him she's forgotten about what happened already, but thanks him and says to stay pals to Matsu's happiness. Tsubasa and Akino then enter, who were worryingly listening, and Akino claims she's not mad if Fuyuki isn't, as Matsu also gifts her a pie. And then Tsubasa gifts them all his favorite sweets, fruits, rice crackers, which makes the girls and Matsuo happy. Later back home, Tsubasa asks Kid for the recipe, saying that Fuyuki loved and wanted to make them, and Kid accepts and smiles. So later he sends her it, but gets a message by Matsuo, who's inviting him to smelt fishing. So he accepted, and days later they went, but they ran into Fuyuki there, who's with her family, though they moved to another spot. So Matsuo decides to invite her, and then digs a hole, and they begin fishing. Though after an hour, they haven't caught anything. So Matsuo decides to go check another spot. Meanwhile, Tsubasa asks Fuyuki if she's bored, but she claims she isn't, and teases him with that they haven't been alone like this in a long time, embarrassing him. But then decides to watch videos with him of makeup, as she says she wants to get a lot better at makeup, and that she'd like to study about beauty abroad, but that's just a dream. But Tsubasa compliments her for caring a ton about it, making her blush and smile. So she then compliments his skin, but up close. But now she wants him to try her lip balm to moisturize his lips, but he gets nervous, thinking it's an ultra-high indirect kiss. But as she goes for it, Tsubasa stares at her lips and thinks on how the indirect kiss would be an actual kiss. But Matsuo interrupts them, saying other spots have fish, so Fuyuki follows him, leaving Tsubasa relieved. And later, they finally caught fish and ate them, as they later spent the day fishing, while Tsubasa the next day recalls he had fun, but he now has a cold. Akino, through text, tells him to rest, while Kid hands him water from Rina, who upon hearing he was sick, rushed home to get it with a note to take care of himself. But Kid has to go run errands now, leaving Tsubasa alone. But later, his cold's gotten worse, and thinks that he needs somebody. But Fuyuki shows up, who ran into Kid, so she would check on him. But then she measures his temperature on top of him with her forehead, leaving him beyond nervous. But she sees he has a fever, so she gives him peppermint candies for his sore throat, which work as he finds them nice. Though then she blames herself for this, recalling that she pushed him to keep on fishing, so she wants to service him today, saying that she'll do anything he says, which makes Tsubasa faint. But he asks Fuyuki to stay by his side, which she accepts as he falls asleep. The next day, Tsubasa wakes up better now and thanks Fuyuki through text, saying her candies helped. But then he asks if they talked about something because he can't remember well, but she says it was nothing. But Tsubasa thinks that it felt like they were holding hands, wondering if he imagined it, while Fuyuki thinks to herself that it'd be great if they could stay like this forever. It's now spring in Hokkaido, though it's still cold, and Tsubasa's now a second year. But on his way to school, he finds Fuyuki, who was waiting for him, wanting to go to school together. So they go and talk about their spring break, as Fuyuki says she was very busy, but that she wishes they could have spent more time together, making him nervous, but she was just teasing him again. Tsubasa then talks about how cherry blossoms haven't bloomed yet here, so Fuyuki explains they bloom in May here. Though Satsuba claims he wants to see Hokkaido's cherry blossoms soon, while Fuyuki looks at him at this. Though then, Tsubasa says he hopes they'll be in the same class, but Fuyuki's nervous, having heard a rumor that they'll be separated due to their grades, and this is why she wanted to walk with him to school today. But Tsubasa tells her she'd visit her in her class if it happened, to her surprise. But he then gets nervous trying to explain, which makes her laugh, but thanks him, as thanks to him, she's not sad anymore. And later, they arrived and found out they were in the same class to their relief, as well as Matsuo and Akino, who Fuyuki notices got a haircut, which Tsubasa compliments, which makes her blush. They then go to class, and there the teacher wants to assign a class president and vice president. So Matsuo nominates Suzuba, saying he's smart, responsible, and a great friend, which Fuyuki agrees with, and Akino. And as the teacher asks Tsubasa, he figures if it means he can help everyone, he'll give it a shot. And since he has no opposition, he's automatically wins. And now it's time to choose a vice president, and Fuyuki suddenly claims she wants that position, though Akino wanted to raise her hand, but chose not to. So without opposition, Fuyuki became the vice president. Later at night, though, Akino is excited because she's going to play a game with Tsubasa while voice chatting. So they boot it up, and he goes for her virtual house, or mansion, to his amazement. But while blushing, she reveals he's the first guy she's brought to her house, which makes him nervous. So he decides to invite her to his place, and they go, but she sees it's the basic one. So she decides to help him collect materials for it, and later, they collected a lot and leaving his house upgrading. Tsubasa thanks her and calls her amazing, but she claims the amazing ones are him, Fuyuki, and Matsuo for accepting being president, nominating herself and nominating Tsubasa respectively, while she claims she hasn't changed at all. But Tsubasa claims she has, having talked to him while isolating, having chose to ski down a mountain, having taught them to play games, and defending Fuyuki from Matsuo. But at this, Akino tries to say that if she's really changed, it's thanks to, but is interrupted as Tsubasa sees his house's finished upgrading, but then asks if Akino was going to say something, but she claims it was nothing. The next day at school at noon, Fuyuki and Tsubasa arrange printouts. Fuyuki claims it's fun to be late at school because it's empty and it feels like they're the only people in the world, asking if it doesn't get his heart beating as they stare at each other. But then Tsubasa nervously remembers to thank her for volunteering for vice president, saying it's helping him tons. She says she never tried doing something like this before, so Tsubasa asks what changed her mind, and she reveals it's because she wanted to spend as much time she could with him. But Tsubasa figures she's just teasing him, but she claims she's serious. But then their teacher interrupts, having come for the printouts. Later, they head home, but Tsubasa notices Fuyuki seems down. But then she tells Tsubasa that Golden Week is next month, asking him to keep one day free for her, because there's something she wants to to tell him, and then says goodbye and heads home alone, leaving Tsubasa's confused. Golden Week has arrived and Tsubasa awaits for Fuyuki at a station, while wondering if she's going to confess to him, but quickly shrugs that thought off. Fuyuki then arrives, so they go board a train, but she's keeping their destination a surprise. And on the train, she's fallen asleep, while Tsubasa recalls how they've done a lot in little time. Though then she wakes up, and seeing her, Tsubasa accidentally says "so pretty" out loud, making her blush. But he tries to nervously explain it, but fails as she lightly punches him while smiling. But the trains arrive, so they first go eat. But then Tsubasa notices Fuyuki staring at him, and she explains he always looks happy when eating. And when she sees him, she gets happy too, so she never wants to stop. But Tsubasa, nervous, wonders if it's not teasing anymore. So he decides it's his turn and tells her she also makes food very delicious, making her blush. So she decides to invite him a bite of her food, and Tsubasa bites into it. Later, she buys a hairpin, asking Tsubasa which one he prefers, and he says the heart one fits her better, so she must buy it. While Tsubasa stares at a bracelet. Afterwards, they take the bus, and later they arrive. But Fuyuki covers his eyes first, and then uncovers them, revealing a place full of blossoms, Higashima-kono Shibazakura Park, explaining that he said he wanted to see cherry blossoms, so she decided to show him another kind of blossom Hokkaido has. And Tsubasa remembers that conversation, and his eye glows, and says this is amazing, making Fuyuki happy. After that, they explore the park, taking pictures, and had a couple take them one together at a shrine. Though then, Fuyuki tells Tsubasa to come back years later to take another picture at the shrine. But Tsubasa's left wondering what she meant by that. Wondering if they're still together as adults, would they still be friends, or something else. Meanwhile, Rina tests her test completion time, but wonders what Tsubasa's doing right now. Though then, keys at her door, having brought the neighborhood bulletin. And later, she returns it at Tsubasa's home, but doesn't find him, but rather his dad. Back at the park, Tsubasa and Fuyuki spend the day exploring the park, taking pictures, eating, and trying the go-karts. And at noon, they enjoy ice cream, so Tsubasa takes her a picture. But it's time they head back. But as Fuyuki talks about his last picture, Tsubasa goes send her it. But he notices she's put their picture together as her profile picture. To his shock, thinking that people think they're a couple, but wonders if Fuyuki's just teasing him again. Though then, he musters up courage and hands her a gift, a bracelet. So she asks him to put it on, so he does, and then they stare at each other. But Tsubasa snaps out of it, hearing a kid laugh. But then Fuyuki tells Tsubasa that she wonders what others think when they see them together, which shocks him, not wanting to respond with truth. So he says they surely just look like two very close friends, but he wonders if he made a mistake. But Fuyuki says she figures she's right. Tsubasa, though, calls himself a coward and feels that Fuyuki's straying away, so he decides to tell Fuyuki at last. But then Fuyuki tells him she's leaving next week to study abroad, which is the thing she wanted to tell him, but that it's all thanks to him, as she learned to work hard on herself because of him. But while saying she's glad they came here before she left Hokkaido, Tsubasa goes and hugs her. But after letting go, Fuyuki sees he's crying. Fuyuki and Tsubasa stare at each other, but then they're warned the park's closing, so they go take the bus. But they're told all the buses left already, as it's the weekend. So Tsubasa calls his dad and explains where he is, but at this he tells him a friend works at a hotel nearby and to stay there, to his and Fuyuki's shock. So later, they've gone there and are nervous, but then they decide to go eat, and his dad's friends serve them a banquet. Afterwards, they head back, but Fuyuki tells Tsubasa she'll shower first, to his utter shock. So later, he's incredibly nervous, even fantasizing with him kissing with Fuyuki, but tries to calm down and turns on the TV. But he sees the Shibazakura Park and thinks on Fuyuki there, wondering he'll ever see her again. Later, Fuyuki exits the shower, but finds Tsubasa asleep already. So she sees him up close, but then she gets closer to his face. But later, she leaves a note and leaves the hotel. The next day, Akino notices Tsubasa hasn't been online in some time and wonders if something happened. Though then, she's approached by her friend Asuka, introducing her friend Hina. Later, Asuka says to hang out, but Akino doesn't want to, so Asuka says she won't get a boyfriend by just playing games. At this, Hina asks if Akino has someone she likes, but she reacts nervously, giving herself away. But then they spot Fuyuki with her mom and suitcases. Meanwhile, Rina drops some food at Tsubasa's home. His dad receives her, asking if she wants to see Tsubasa, who's in his room, but she claims it's fine, though we see Tsubasa looks lost, and then Rina leaves. Meanwhile, Akino talks to Fuyuki about how she didn't tell Tsubasa she was traveling abroad, but Fuyuki reveals she did when they went out together, which shocks Akino. But then Fuyuki tells her she wanted to spend her life having fun with them forever, but realized that wasn't going to be enough, having seen her friends work hard, thinking they're so cool. So she decided to study makeup, saying that she'll go hard at it, so one day she'll be as cool as them, which makes Akino smile. Though then, Nia texts her it's time to go, so she says goodbye. And then Akino texts Tsubasa that Fuyuki's on her way to the airport, asking if he won't say goodbye, while Akino decides to go out with her friends. Meanwhile, Tsubasa thinks on how, after seeing her note, he thought she didn't like him anymore, but that he wants to see her, but can't bring himself to go. But moving his backpack, Fuyuki's hairpin falls, wondering how it got there. But feeling like Fuyuki's giving him a little push, he decides to give it back. So he asks his dad to take him to the airport, but he can't as he has a meeting. But he begs, saying he has to see someone no matter what. So his dad calls someone and asks them to take over for him, figuring that this is something Tsubasa and his friend don't want to regret. At the airport, Mia's excited to fly, but Fuyuki's quiet. Like hearing her flight's ready, Mia goes to the bathroom and Fuyuki goes to the gate, figuring the hairpin wasn't enough for Tsubasa to come. But she hears her name and is stopped by Tsubasa, who came to return her hairpin, but says he really needed to see her before she left, making Fuyuki blush, calling this cliche. But Tsubasa tells her he's glad he came to Hokkaido and met her. And at first he was nervous being alone, but she was always there for him. So it doesn't matter if it's months or years, he'll be waiting for her to see the blossoms again. But Fuyuki reveals it's just 2 weeks, to his utter embarrassment. But she explains 2 weeks is still too long for her, as she's never left Hokkaido before and got very nervous. But as she puts her hairpin on, tells him she'll come back totally caught up to him, and they say goodbye to each other. While later, Tsubasa looks at their bracelet. Time later, Tsubasa attends school and Akino tells him to play games together later, but notices he's saving some food. And afterwards, Tsubasa's nervous. But then Fuyuki arrives, having returned from her trip, as Tsubasa smiles. And then he gives her chicken from the supermarket, which she adores and begins eating it, and feeds Tsubasa one. But their teacher reproaches them for this, but they're still left happy.